and education for young people, as well as in advancing policies to really improve the health and socioeconomic status of young people. Alfred is a member of the Kenya Red Cross, Amnesty Kenya, the United Nations Changemakers, as well as GOYN, where, as I noted, he was a founding member. He has created empowering spaces for young people. So he has created an art studio, information and communication technology room, a youth-friendly center offering health services to 5,000 youth, and a youth podcast. So on completing the Mandela Washington Fellowship for African Youth Leaders, he became a global speaker. So quite an impressive young man. So next, and sitting next to Alfred is Vicky Aridi. She is the program manager for Youth Economic Opportunities, which is an initiative of Making Sense International, an NGO based in the US. Overseeing is a global initiative bringing young people and multi-stakeholders to accelerate SDG 8 on decent youth employment. She's also a UNICEF Generation Unlimited Global Board member. Vicky is a lawyer by profession and also has developed expertise in youth economic opportunities and has supported efforts to accelerate youth economic opportunities, green job skills development, and entrepreneurship. So prior to joining Making Sense International, she was the youth coordinator for Fair Trade Africa, held position with the UN Joint SDG Fund and the UN Sustainable Development Solution Network, and was the youth liaison and advocacy officer. Also a recipient of Kenya's Top 35 Under 35 Awards and the Top 30 30 Africans Award. So, again, another very accomplished panelist today with us. Next, we have Tere Lanzagorta. She's the director of Youth Build Mexico, which is the anchor partner of GOYN. And she's also a member of the coordination team in the Alianza Jóvenes con Trabajo Digno, which is the Alliance for Youth with Decent Work. She has 30 years of experience working with young people, especially opportunity youth. She has founded and directed several nonprofit organizations in Mexico, where she has built and coordinated a number of public policy programs. Since the 90s, Tere has created and been part of various local, national, and international networks focused on youth, including the national network focusing on issues to reduce the dropout rate among students in high school, and also working on crime prevention programs. And in all those networks, she's really playing a leading role. So another accomplished panelist. And then last but not least is Dana Francois. She is the program officer for Family Economic Security for Haiti under the Kellogg Foundation's Latin America and Caribbean team. With over 20 years of expertise in racial, economic, and gender equity, she has effectively championed sustainable economic development, leading diverse coalitions across global sectors. Dana's influence extends as the governance chair in diversity, equity, and inclusion, chairman for the network of engaged international donors, and she's the 2023 Martin Luther King Jr. Alumni Legacy and Social Innovation Leader at Babson College. Previously, she made impactful contribution at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, shaping policy favoring minority families. She also played a pivotal role at the William Monroe Charter Institute, concentrating on improving Haiti's higher education. And if I may add, I got to know Dana a little bit last night. She also started her activism at the age of 11. So another very accomplished panelist, and I have to say, very proud to have them join our panel. Okay, so we'll get started. So Alfred, I'm going to start with you. And Alfred, so you are leading the Pointe Youth Network, which is a youth established and youth run organization. And you're also a Mandela Fellow. And for those who are not aware, the Mandela Fellowship is actually a very prestigious and very competitive fellowship for young African leaders. So Alfred, the question we would like you to start us with is, how are you bringing that network of the Mandela Fellowship to the Pointe Youth Network, and really what does it mean for a grassroots, locally based youth organization to be connected to global networks?
Thank you so much, Petul. As she said, I am an alumni of the Mandela Fellowship. And for me, first of all, I should admit that it is prestigious, as she has said. And it has given me a network to work with other young African leaders. The second thing is that apart from me getting to know other young leaders across Africa, it has also given me an opportunity to leverage on the different skills and to also able to collaborate with them in the different aspects and programs that I do. The prestigious program also comes with an opportunity for resources, whereby I've been able to apply for different financial and non-financial resources to be able to continue with my work as Pointe Youth Network. As a young leader who was part of the Mandela Fellowship, I did not only learn, but I was able to network with other young leaders, get to know what they do, and probably be able to replicate some of the work that they are doing across different countries from where they come from. So I'll say that it is an important aspect for young African leaders to understand that for us to achieve a better Africa, we need to leverage on the different strengths that we come with, the different ability that we come with. And of course, through the U.S. Department of State, they are also providing resources. Like last year, we implemented a digital literacy program with a colleague from TZ. And through the program, we were able to develop a manual, a digital literacy manual, that is currently being used in 18 schools in Kenya and 10 schools in Tanzania. Isn't that incredible? The other opportunity that I want to share about the MWF and how I've leveraged on it, it was also an opportunity for me to network with the US professions and the US colleges. And as it stands today, we are currently developing one children picture book with children from Bangladesh slum, something that 2 years ago it wasn't going to be possible. So I'll say that the program has brought to me not only the knowledge, the network, but also the resources that I've been able to capitalize on. I'll want to say that most of the time, young people believe that it is just a fellowship, but it goes beyond the fellowship. Because through the alumni engagement program, there are several opportunities to speak in different platforms, to network with different professions across the US and outside the US, but also to be able to get resources from them and partner with them in the different programs that we intend to do in the country you come from. So Pointe Youth Network have vastly benefited from the program, and we were able to even start a micro library through a partnership with the institute that I went to called California State University. Of course, a prestigious university. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alfred. So again, thinking about how grassroots organizations are leveraging the potential, the resources, and the connections that they make through these opportunities and through these more global networks. So now we're going to turn over to Vicky. So as I mentioned, Vicky is with Making Sense International, which puts on an annual conference called YEO 2030. And in the US, it is one of the premier conferences that bring together stakeholders working in international developments to come and discuss youth issues. What has been really interesting is in the past couple of years, there's been a shift in how this conference has focused. Now they're much more, as Vicky would say, action-oriented, They are linked to the SDG 8, and they have really deepened the engagement and the connection with young people. So what we wanted to hear from you, Vicky, if you could share with us, is how did you leverage the network that you're part of? Because as part of the strategy review, they connected to their members, the members of their network, to help inform the new strategy. And what was the learning through that process?
Thank you, Petula. Just to give a bit of a background, so as she said, the GYO Summit has been going on for about 15 years now, and we're bringing together young people and multi-stakeholders to share learning, advance evidence generation, forge partnerships around youth economic opportunities. And so after doing this for 15 years, you sit back and say, what's the so what? What's going beyond the conference? And that caused us to pivot and to see how can we link our learning to action, so become more action-oriented. And then we're talking about youth economic opportunities. So how can we ensure that we're being intentional and elevate the leadership and voices of young people? And so it was a very iterative process of co-creation with our members, learning, because we're a learning network. And so we started with youth dialogues. So working with our members and youth-led organizations across the countries to host 19 youth dialogues. And something interesting about the approach that we used with the members is, with the members, we identified which key youth-led organizations are already meeting at the local levels. So not coming and saying, let's have a convening around this, but what are they already doing and how can we use their convening to learn, which was a key constituent of that. Then from the youth dialogues, the young people were able to share what are the key issues, how should we pivot, what should we focus on. And then we took it now to the continental level, so building it up to the regional level. And what we were looking at is, now we've gotten the findings from young people, how can we now create solutions towards what our learning agenda should be? And so we used an approach by Brookings Institute called the 17 Rooms. And how that approach works, it's basically bringing together different stakeholders around the table to be able to think and frame key issues on tasks that are big enough to matter, small enough to get done within a 12 to 18-month period. And so we use that approach with our members to craft out what is possible between 12 to 18 months. And then from there, really iterative now, came up with the topics that we're going to focus on, which gave birth to action teams and working groups, which gave the action-oriented piece. Now, something interesting is, yes, we had working groups that worked for a long period of time, 1 year. But we were seeing that when you're thinking through working groups and the action-oriented piece, there's a need to think through the incentivization of the members. It's a community of practice. They're doing their time really for free. And for young champions, how do we generate value? So those were some of the things that we were grappling with. Another thing is, how do we integrate capacity strengthening into the community of practice? Because you have youth champions, you have multi-stakeholders. So how do you ensure that there's that flow of information and that peer-to-peer and intergenerational mentorship? And those are some of the things that we were really grappling with. The last thing that I'll say is accessibility and platforms are critical. So for some action teams, they had opted to use WhatsApp, but we had some members who WhatsApp had been banned in their countries, so they couldn't even engage. So really thinking through, how do we look at the accessibility of some of our platforms? How do we ensure that everyone can be able to meaningfully collaborate? And so those were some of the things that we worked with our members to really pivot. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vicky. So quite a few things also packed in there, right? How do you leverage the learning to lead to action, which I think is really much part of what networks are about. She also explained the process they went through. And also, how do you leverage local organization, particularly with young people who already are meeting, already are doing this kind of work, and really uplifting their voices and bringing that to the next level at a regional and more global level. So thank you so much, Vicky. So Tere, now I'm going to turn to you. As we said, Tere has been involved in building a number of networks and coalition in Mexico, and in particular, bringing very different stakeholders to the table, right? Working with governments, different. Working with the private sector, different. Civil society, right? Young people. And so, based on your experience today, it would be great if you could share with us what are some of those kind of like fundamental elements or factors that you want to make sure get established from the get-go, so you kind of build that strong foundation. But at the same time, what also are some of the challenges, right, when you bring different stakeholders together who may have a different language, a different vision, right, different incentives? So over to you.
Thank you, Petula. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you this afternoon. I hope that what I can share make you discover that you have a big experience on that and that you have more than you can imagine. I want to share with you that, yes, now I'm participating in a big alliance, as you said, Petula, and I want to say that the first step for me is when you try to create a network with the NGOs, with the civil organizations, you have to build the network if you don't want to believe that it's done and then it's not done. And then you have a lot of problems then if you not take care of that. What I'm saying, in our experience, you have to have very clear what is your mission. It's not enough to say we work with youth. There are many youths. So for us, it takes time to define and to be together specifically what we understand of opportunity youth, and we adopt the concept, and we study the reality, and we have to precise what are we talking about. It's not enough to say you would like to contribute for better jobs. You have to precise what are you talking about. And in this sense, there are the common mission, the common strategy, the specific goals the network wants to achieve, and also to have very clear the roles. When we say collaborative, it's an easy word, it's a difficult reality, because you have to have the ability to organize and to have very clear the different roles in the network. So the first step for us was to have this clear, and then to stay talking with different actors was another thing. I would like to share with you the experience that I have learned a lot. For example, if we have in our network the private sector, no, the employers. Because it's not a good idea that you think that the employers will have your language or your vision or your objectives. No, they have their own, because they are companies. So, for example, one sentence that is different from one place to another. We said, we want all the young people, all the opportunity you have a good job. But then you listen, I don't find the talent. I have many vacancies, but I don't have the talent from youth. So this is, and the two things are truth. So if you don't have the capacity to understand what the company is saying, you will not make a good network with them, because they have their own interests and you have your own interests, but you can have both similar interests. I remember when I participated in my first meeting, not with the foundation from one company, not with the responsibility area, but with the human resources area, was another thing for me, because they talk another language. Their worries are others. And I say, how can I help if I am an NGO, if I am having training courses for the youth? How can I talk with these people? But now we have learned that to talk not only with the social area of the company, but with the whole company, and to be able to agree what they need and how this can help to our objectives, for example. Now I have many experiences. This year, last year, we have been working with different companies, creating together the profiles, according together the salaries, and many things that was impossible to think 2 years ago, because I am an NGO. And so this is what I want to share. And with the governments, which is the other stakeholders, the first thing I would like to say here is that it's not one government. in any city of the world, you cannot say the government, because it has different ways, different areas. So you have to find where and how and with whom to make alliance if you want to work with them. And I think that I have a different experience in my country with the different governments, and you have to understand what they want, what are their goals, because they're different. So I can say that the multi-sector networks can be done if you are open and you understand the difference between one and another, no? But also if you can find what is common for all, and how you can build a network in which it's not that you will win, that you will contribute to, and that everyone will win. At the end of the day, that Opportunity Youth will win if we are able to build strong networks with the different stakeholders of the society. No.
Thank you, Tere. So one of the things you said, which I thought was very interesting, often, when we talk to people who may not be that familiar with the youth sector, says youth is not a homogeneous group, right? There's segments. I think one of the messages here is the private sector is not a homogeneous group. The government is not a homogeneous group. So really understand who your specific stakeholders are is really critical. So now I'm going to turn over to Dana, and really kind of very particular kind of perspective. In particular, one of the things we would love Dana to really highlight for you is the Haiti within of equity and systems change within the vision and the work that the Kellogg Foundation does in that area.
Thank you, Petula, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you this week. So I'm going to share a bit, and similarly to Tere, I hope that what I share with you, you find yourself, and I know you will find yourself within it, and I hope that you can take some nuggets of it as well. So as a foundation, we've been working in Haiti, and we realized very quickly through community meetings, conversation with young people, that the solutions are there, that the expertise is there, but the conversations and activities were very siloed. And we're talking across the board. We're talking about international NGOs, we're talking about local business sectors, we're talking about local government, talking about even other funders. And we realized that the role, and that's one other, we could convene, we could bring different actors to the table, and we could do that in a way that really looks at the long-term vision around what communities wanted, whether it was jobs for youth, whether it was hospital systems, and so forth. So we started by gathering partners across the communities in Haiti, and that was the beginning, and everything that Tere just talked about in terms of a focused mission, values. I can't emphasize values enough. Why do we do the things that we do? And equity being a key value, so that nothing for community without community, and if somebody is missing from the table, why, and how do we make sure that they're at the table in a leading position? So we organize the space, and as a funder, we have the resources. We're very privileged to have the resources to be able to play the role, in multiple roles. To Tere's point, we've played the role of facilitator, we've played the role of convener, we've played the role of mediator, because another thing with networks is the fact that conflict is a reality, ambiguity is a reality. The importance of getting to the vision, but being flexible on the methods within the network, and the learning and the trust building that needs to happen between organizations day in and day out was critical. So we realized that as a funder, we needed to play different roles at different moments in time to hold the space that allows actors to work together in support of youth and community. And we've supported this process with the Haiti Peer Learning Network, who became this embodied larger network. And we supported this process of collaboration, exchange, learning around what works, what doesn't work, sometimes conflict, constructive conflict, and functioning in ambiguity. Because within everything we're talking about, conditions in community continue to shift. You know, Haiti has been unfortunately impacted by climate change events. So people continue to sometimes lose their jobs, businesses continue to close, while also communities continue to really drive for success. So there's a very dynamic ecosystem. So within the dynamic reality of communities, then we need to continuously find ways to be relevant and to have our fingers on the pulse and to recalibrate, which leads me to my third point of agility in terms of continuing to learn, to be a network that doesn't exist for the sake of existing, but that exists in service of community priorities, and that there are tangible results to the work that actors are doing together to see transformational change. So it's been 10 years, and it's led to the creation of other networks. There's a major network around food systems, another one around place-based community development, around education, healthcare, health training systems, and all together working with hundreds and thousands of community organizations and reaching people at the front line of change, and particularly young people. And we're at a moment of kind of reflection again around the so what at this point, 10 years in. What does it mean for the future, and what are some of the things that we may need to consider as a funder or partner? But again, I want to emphasize the fact that a funder is only a partner to the priorities of the communities, but not the driving factor for change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dana. So again, to pull out some of those, the key things we heard, value, how critical value, in the case of Kell Foundation, equity was central, part of their value. About staying in your lane. So that's an expression, particularly for people who run. When you run, you know, you've got to stay in your lane. And so it's really also recognizing kind of like what you're good at, what your role is, and kind of staying in that lane. She also talked about ambiguity. Ambiguity is part of network, it's part of relationships, right? And be kind of comfortable with ambiguity. Talk about inclusion and equity is also to how do we ensure that in the networks we are not always working with the usual suspects, right? And what we mean by usual suspects are the same people we tend to go to, right, or work with. And also kind of really keeping in mind that all relationships and network, once built, have to be nurtured and strengthened, right? Investing the time, you know, the work in making that grow. So wanted to really hear, Vicki, from you about, you know, how do we make this happen? How do we ensure that grassroots, local organization, youth-led organization, right, are also connected, part of those global networks? And Vicki, having worked also both within the context of Kenya, but also now with Making Sense International, also kind of bringing from your perspective, what are some of those kind of key elements that you've seen that really ensure that we always keep inclusivity and equity front and center in the networks?
Thank you, Petula. And maybe, because I know it's lunch, we're just from lunch, so to get the pulses in the room thinking, how many of us have fallen into the trap of engaging the usual suspects? You can raise your hand or you can scream in your hearts, whichever works for you. Great what's face, and because, I mean, it's easier, it's the tried and tested approach. You know, we're very assured if we use the usual suspects, the donor will be happy, we'll get the required results, and we can move on. But in a world where we're looking at equity, we're looking at localization, we really need to move beyond the usual suspects. And it really starts to what Dana said about having equity as a value, so getting it right from the start. And at the start means having equity as that value, which is driving your network. Everything you're doing, going back to your values and saying, how do we continue to live our values through whatever we're doing? And thinking through including the non-usual suspects, not as an afterthought, because I think sometimes we decide after our first speaker or our first person is not there, then we'll say, oh yeah, maybe it would be good to include, maybe we can advance localization, you know? But really not as an afterthought, not a trend now, but actually being very intentional. Then the second piece is really around our perception of what equity and inclusion means. For each of us in our different organizations and networks, inclusion, what that means. So really seeing, is our definition of inclusion really inclusion? Is it really equitable? What does that look like? And then the third piece I would say is capacity strengthening of both youth leaders and local organizations and adult allies. And I can share a bit of our experience with our network. So at YO 2030, a big piece of our work moving forward is really how can we ensure that the non-usual suspects are able to participate, engage in these networks, be able to engage with donors and different stakeholders. So having young people in the room, strengthening their capacity through a series of sessions, and then doing the same for adult allies, because sometimes we only do the training for the young people. But how do we ensure that adult allies are able to meaningfully engage? And as Teresa said, there's no one size fits all. So even as we're training these different stakeholders, looking at what is their incentive for meaningful youth engagement, for inclusion, what does that look like? And this is something we have done through Youth Power 2 learning and evaluation, which is a broader youth mechanism for USA that Making Sense International is supporting. And a key component of this is really training USAID missions across the globe to be able to engage meaningfully with different young leaders, local organizations, and bring the non-usual suspects. And of course, there's a lot of learning from that. And the fourth piece I would say that's really critical is how do we think about participation for non-usual suspects? At a basic level, we have to be able to remunerate them for their time. And then the second one is exposure is not enough. I feel like sometimes when we bring young leaders or local organizations or non-usual suspects, we're like, we have given you the platform, we've done our job. But really, how do we also think about what is the incentive for that partner and view them as a partner? How does that opportunity then translate to them either getting capacity strengthening opportunities? And at the heart of it, for a youth organization, grants for their organization, or a young leader, an employment opportunity, how do we connect those dots? And the last piece I would say is accessibility. So I think sometimes when we're looking at inclusion of non-usual suspects, we don't think through enough how we can make the space accessible, even starting from the language. And something I keep hearing a lot is the word empowerment. And if you really look at the heart of empowerment, it is a non-inclusive term, because you're saying that in essence, that non-usual suspect doesn't have any value to add. So how do we think even of the terminology that we use when we're bringing them into this space? And then also, how do we think of the platforms? For everyone, for different suspects or different people, it's not easy to hold a microphone and share their thoughts in the most coherent way. So how do we think of using different strategies like smaller groups or silent documentation where people can be able to still share their values? So those are some of the things to think about.
Great, thank you, Vicky. A lot of elements here. Some that we really want to pull out is intentionality. Again, equity at the center of the value. What does participation really look like, right? And how do we make it accessible, right? Too often we hear, oh, too complicated, too costly, we don't have the time. if it's really intentional and there's a true commitment, we will make it happen. The only thing I just want to add, and I so agree with you, empower. I have to say that word really gets me because, again, no one has the power to give power to someone else. People empower themselves. And so I think it's really also important that we use the language, because the language is a vehicle for describing our values and how we think. And I think that's really something that we should all really kind of think about, right? So thank you so much for bringing that point, because I feel very strongly about that aspect. So I'm going to turn over to Alfred. And I've heard Alfred also talk about the importance of physical spaces for young people and youth networks. But we also know that increasingly we are in a very virtual, right, environment where now a lot of the networks are virtual. So what we wanted to see, what we want to hear from Alfred about is what are some of the challenges but also opportunities you see for really grassroots organization to really be part of the virtual, cross-regional, global networks? And why do you think it's important to have these physical spaces within those local contexts?
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll begin with the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is access to resources. How many young people are agreeing with me on that? Is it a big challenge? Yes. So access to both financial and non-financial resources have been a big challenge to most grassroots organizations. And I think just by the show of hand, most of them have agreed to that. Another thing is visibility. Most of the time you find that young people or a grassroots organization would entirely do 90% of the work, and the credit 100% goes to the subsidiary who have actually given them that resource. So I think that is also another challenge. So it means that you work and then the visibility of your work is out of no-go zone. The other thing has been the different talents and skills that the grassroots organization have. Sometimes you find that INGOs or donor taps into the strength or the pillar within the grassroots organization. And of course, it's a good thing that that person have gotten a greener pasture. But here you are leaving a grassroots organization without the strongest pillar. And then the last thing is lack of capacity. Sometimes you find that most of the grassroots organization, they really want to do it. They really want to go out of their way to implement this work, but their capacity is still wanting. So for physical space, I think one of the most important things have been that the physical space act as referral point for these young people. I'll give an example. Most of us, while growing up, were not sure of what we want. But having a physical space, a young person comes into a place like Swahili Port, a place like One Youth Network. They get to see the different skills and the different opportunities that are there, and they get to know that I will identify myself with this opportunity. So for me, this is the reason why we have physical space. It's a space for them to come and learn, and then to realize their different skills and capacity. The other thing has been, it is also a training space and a place for workshops and for those who are in the creative sector, for them to develop their talent and their skills. Most of the time you find that young people would have the talents, but without the space, then it means that the talent will go to waste, because they do not have a space to explore the skills, to explore the talent, and also to get to be linked up with other opportunity. The other thing is it also builds up other groups that are not able to have physical space. Yes, we are agreeing that the world is going digital. But again, there is still a digital gap. And that is why for us, physical spaces are important, because for those young people, like for instance, a young person in Mwakirunge, or a young person in Bangladesh, or in Jomvu, they may not be able to have access to the internet. So if we today tell them that they can have access to the digital space, then automatically they are left out in programming. So for us, having physical space, it means that they can actually come and access the digital device, access the internet, but also access the different opportunities that governments and also the private sector have. And then the last thing is that government these days they are shrinking spaces for young people. And for us, creating these spaces means that we can be able to tap in the different skills that young people have, but we can be able to link them up with the different government opportunities that exist. Today, government comes to us and tell us we have this opportunity. Kindly share with the young people that you work with. Not all of them, of course, have access to the internet, so through the youth spaces, young people generally come to the space and say, what are the opportunities that exist? And for us, those are some of the pointers of why we say that it's important for us to have physical spaces for them to get referred, for them to get other opportunities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alfred. If I could just say, if someone from the team can just connect with me separately, I just want to get a time check. We weren't given a sense of how long we have, and we do want to leave some room for some Q&A, but let me continue to Tere. So now another element that also comes into play is once we also get to the kind of global level, right? And it's not just about also opportunity, but there are also some challenges. Some of it I think that connects as we try to move from grassroots, right, to national, to regional, and even to global. So Youth Build has also been part of different networks. The Youth Build Network, the GOYN network, but also from your experience. So if you could just highlight quickly to us, Tere, a little bit, what do you see as some of these challenges when you are then operate at a more global level, but also what are maybe some of the opportunities that one sees, right, moving from, let's say, national to kind of global?
Yes, what I can say is that I have been part of this global organization. I am part of this global organization, Youth Build, and when you want to work globally, the first thing that is, I know is not new for you, but I want to say, to underline, is to deep respect of different cultures. In my experience, no, this happened in Mexico because Youth Build never imposed the way to work, but start working from us, from the culture, from the situation, from the the country reality. And I want to underline this because can be an opportunity or can be a challenge, no? It depends how do you work. I have been part of different global networks, and I can say, I want to say an example quickly, Petula, if I can. For example, in my job, in Mexico, we decided to create what we call the Second Chance High School. And we went to see the experience in the United States, but if we think that we can do the exactly same experience, not have a long term, will die, I think. Because the countries are different, culturally, politically, no? Of a global network is to inspire one another, to take ideas, but then to have the ability to do the program, to do the experience. with a very deep resources, no? And with a very deep alliance in the country. Because country to country, we are different in political issues, also in how the companies understands the philanthropy. So you can take ideas of international companies, but then you have to work with the local companies, and this is another story. How to contribute to build the philanthropy culture in your country, taking ideas of the global, but doing the things that you need to do. And sometimes there is a risk, a challenge or risk. If you can replicate, if you want, replicate the same methodology or the same idea, if you don't take care of the local reality. For example, in Mexico, we took so many years thinking how to create a youth movement, alumni movement, because we couldn't do exactly as in the United States, because our reality is different. Even if I live in a democratic country, the democracy is not the same in Mexico than in other countries, and you have to be very careful so you don't put in risk the youth when they are mobilizing or creating the movements. So that's what I can say. In my view, this global network is very helpful, but please don't think that we can do the same, because we are different. And talking about the recent experience with GOYN is the same thing. I love how all the things are, we have standards in many things, but also we have to know that each country has to adapt and to do. And maybe the last challenge I can say is to be careful not to use the global network or the global fundings to remain doing what you have always done. This is if you don't have the ability to do new with the network, this will not be helpful for you and for your organization. That's it.
Thank you. So very quickly, so I think we're going to move to the last question with Dana, just kind of time check, and then we really want to have at least a few minutes to get your questions or input. So I'm going to go to Dana to really take us to the finish line, and then we'll open it up for any questions or comments that you would like to have. So. Dana, as you reflect on the work that the Kellogg Foundation has done and the significant investment is made over the years in building networks, we would love to hear your thoughts about the future of networks, right? Particularly when we look also some of the challenges and opportunities, right? Increased conflict, globalization, right? At the same time, AI. We just had a session earlier this morning where we learned more about, kind of AI and how it's shifting, the future and the opportunities. So if you could talk a little bit about, based on your own experience, also the learning from your organization, how do you see the future of networks?
Thank you so much, Petula. So, even though Petula said that I started this work at 11, I'm about 25, so I'm still a young person. But so because of that kind of long history, I've had the opportunity to kind of pay attention for a long time around the continuum of this kind of work that we're doing, right? The issue of opportunities for young people to thrive truly, to see communities change. These are things that so many of us have been engaging with and doing for a very long time. So with that said, as we think about the future of network, and I think about what are some of the things that have remained true, and what are some of the things that have changed over time, and as a foundation as well, I think one of the things that I'll start with that has remained true is that being in love with the ultimate reason why and the purpose of the work, as opposed to the tools that we're using to come together and the more short-term goals, is critical. Because sometimes the solutions are going to evolve. To Terry's point, solutions are not a one-size-fits-all. They have to be from the ground, and it will change and it will evolve. So being in love with getting to that transformative change of deep-seated issues, as opposed to how we call things, as opposed to how we do things, and as opposed to even the credit for celebrating achievements, is fundamentally important because they will change and evolve. And the degree to which networks are relevant to changing conditions truly and to solving problems is the degree to which networks will survive and will transform and will evolve to meet the times that they're in. And that happens when you have people at the forefront of the issues, at the forefront of leading those networks, making decisions around those networks, and being in governance related to those networks. One of the other lessons that we learn as a foundation, and I think that, thank you, Alfred, for raising the elephant of the room of resources. I can't stress how important it is to not only resource the institutions within those networks to be strong institutions, because the issues that we're dealing with in all aspects are issues that are anchored in a system. And institutions outlive all of us. Institutions carry memory. Institutions can change systems. As individuals, sometimes there is a bit of a tendency to kind of focus on what we can do as people and thinking about what legacy do we leave within institutions to take on the work even long after we're gone. So strengthening institutions and funding institutions to do this work and institutions and the communities is incredibly important. And I think the last piece that I'll share, a colleague shared with me this kind of reflection not too long ago. We live in times that are incredibly complicated, where communities, where young people are dealing with issues that oftentimes are impacted by forces and dynamics that come from far, far away. And it's a very dynamic kind of set of circumstances. And climate change is a good example of that. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem that we're going to experience a different reality anytime soon. So what do we do? I think everything that the panel has shared today are all indices around what's important, where to focus, and what we need to be careful about. The last piece that I would leave you with is the trust that you have what it takes to meet the challenge of today and tomorrow, and believing in that. That's the first thing. The second thing that I would say is to be comfortable with ambiguity. Being comfortable with not knowing, being comfortable with making mistakes and failing, and being okay with that and learning from that. Study what has been done before, because sometimes the solutions have been tried, tested, and set aside because they don't work. Study, study, study. Understand the legacies of the issues that we're dealing with, those who have come before. Listen to what they have to say. And the last piece that I would say is get comfortable with the notion of expanding to embrace the ambiguity. Mentally expanding as a network, being agile to embrace the fact that these are times that are presenting challenges that we don't know yet, but trusting that fundamentally none of the issues that we're facing are from anywhere else. They are man-made, and because they are man-made, we have what it takes to face them. But getting comfortable and expanding our understanding as people and as networks to embrace them where they are, and meeting the challenge of today as we keep a strong eye on solving these issues, hopefully once and for all in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana. I won't even do her justice by summarizing, but I think she very clearly summarized and really highlights some of the key aspects that we talked. So if I can please ask you to give a round of applause to our colleagues who really bring a wealth of experience. One second. Wealth of experience. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to open it up and see if there are any questions. And then I know that Alfred would like to add something. So before we close, we'll make sure he gets to speak. We have 12 minutes? Perfect. Okay. So let's open it up. Again, we want to highlight You are as much the expert as the people here. You bring different perspective, personal experience to this conversation. What we wanted to do was to bring you a different outlook, different learning, and often very much influenced by people's personal and professional experiences. So hopefully you also will share and bring your experience to the conversations. So I see your hand up over there.
Okay, good afternoon again. I really enjoyed the conversations about networking and building resilience, but I would like to question something about leaving the whole work of empowering young people to organizations, to NGOs, right? Where's the government? Where's the government? What do you do in your capacity to push for from what you find out, what works for young people? What do you do to push for policies in the government level? Okay, thank you.
So do you have it for a specific person, or you're opening
I would
it
like
up?
to ask Alfred and Vic.
Okay,
Thank you.
very good. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll begin by saying that, yes, we're in the policy space. We've trained young people as policy champions. And as it stands today, young people have participated, like for instance, the case of Kenya, our young people have actively participated in the legislation of the Kenya youth policy. And as it stands today, through GOYN, we're actually pushing for Mombasa County youth policy. I think that's my response to that. There are a couple of other policies that we are championing for, but I think meaningfully young people are participating in the policy processes at the county level and also at the national level. That's the case for Kenya. Thank you.
And maybe to add, understanding that the policy process has its own bureaucracies and complexities at a base level. And so I'll give feedback from the different hats I wear, but starting with Making Sense International and the GYU network, really. So we provide that space for learning, and we bring on board the donors, so the governments like USAID, the different state departments, policy makers, practitioners, and young people. So by providing that space for all the players to be in the room is the first step, because if they're not talking to each other, they can't even collaborate. So bringing them together in the room to be able to learn from each other. Then the second step is, so they're in the room, how do you take it forward? And that's where advocacy is really critical. So understanding how do we advocate and push the right buttons. And the third piece, which is tied to advocacy, is the incentive. Why should the government engage with young people? What's in it for them? So really identifying what's the sweet spot, where the gaps, and how do you really move that forward? And that's really something we're trying to push forward through learning as the backbone. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah, just make sure you direct the question to someone in particular. That'd be helpful. Thank you.
First off, thank you, Dana, Tere, Vicky, Alfred, Petula, for facilitating the session and sharing your knowledge and experience. My name is Seth Diamond. I work for Youth Build USA. And I don't have as much of a question, but just one point I want to add to build off something both Tere and Dana mentioned. And I think it's about the power of networks. As practitioners, one of the things we deal with, or one of the challenges we have to grasp, is the divide between global and local. And I think that networks provide a tool, a mechanism to bridge that gap. Through networks, we can leverage, embrace not only the threads that connect us at the global level, climate change, migration, violence prevention, and so on, while also leveraging the knowledge, experience, and tools that exist within contextualization and localization of solutions. So I think there's immense power in connecting organizations, individuals, leaders through these networks as a way to bridge the gap between local and global. Thank you all.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. I hope translation is working. So, to whom are you addressing the question? The question is addressed to the government and Alfred. Thank you to all the panelists. The presentations you've made are reassuring us and showing us the importance of putting in place networks which are resilient. And Alfred talked about the challenges, whether it be visibility or access to resources, demonstrates that the decision of putting in place a network is already a strategic step. That is a factor. Now to go back to the first question, it was regarding the government. We know that there are some realities like that we need to come into terms with, like she said, and our interventions in most of the times need to be aligned on the priorities of the government, which makes me ask you these following questions. Which is the common denominator or the success key of putting in place a sustainable network which is strong, knowing very well that the government could have priorities that are different from ours? So I give the example of Senegal. Our priority is based on the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic had a lot of impact on employment. There are a lot of people who found themselves jobless. And another thing that impacted our youth policy at the government level is the demonstrations by the youth, which made that the state asked the questions what it needed to do to respond to this youth that is more and more demanding. So my question is, which is this common denominator that we need to consider so that we can succeed in putting in place a network that is strong and sustainable, and that it's going to remain even if the government is fighting against it? So the question is addressed to Tere. In the government.
Thank you for your question. This is not my best moment in Mexico to talk about my government, because the current administration the first statement they did was to say that they will not work with NGOs. So it's not a good moment for me. But let me tell you what I think. What I think is that we have to face the different moments of the government. We have to make strong networks if you want to talk and if you want to impact in some way in public programs, no? But it's what I was talking about is exactly that for me there is no the same thing you can do in every country, because it depends where and it depends when, no? But what I think is that if you do the best in your program and you have a strong network, you will more be able to talk with the governments and to press the government, and there are different moments. Sometimes you can make him your alliance because they want to work with you, and in another time maybe you have to fight with them because you have to win your cause, no? Opportunity youth.
I'll add a little bit to what Tay had said. What helps sometimes is that it's, on one end, if you think about your work and you think about what is your theory of change, so you think about what is your ultimate goal, right? And you map that. When you map your ultimate goal, you can make a distinction between your ultimate goal and your more short-term, medium-term goals that relate to that ultimate goal, and figure out how you communicate. Because sometimes what we've seen related to government buy-in to the work is where and how you communicate what it is that you do. Oftentimes, and as government, and in Haiti, I'm also both in a good and bad position to be talking about this, because we've had a lot of shifts in government, but in terms of the goals of the state as an administrative apparatus for the country, some of those goals are the same. They don't change. As an example, youth opportunity remains youth opportunity. The how you target it changes government to government. So if you kind of map your ultimate goal and you figure out what piece of your work you communicate how to the government at different moment in time, then you find that point in common where their language matches your language. So it's a bit of a tactical recommendation.
So I think, maybe we'll take one more and then we'll close the session. Can we give the mic to Mapa, please? And Mapa, if you could say who you're directing the question to, that'd be
Okay,
great.
my question is to Vicky, but I just wanted to say something, and is that for us it's been important to understand that nobody has the scale and the money that the government has. So if we are a network with only 5 allies that nobody knows about, they're not going to talk about, they're not going to talk with us. But if we build a network big enough, strong enough, we are not going to need to talk to them because they are going to want to talk to us. And the advantage of that is that we have not a period of time. They have. So we are the ones that can ensure that what they do that is positive for the youth stays. So we can go and say, I'm your ally, your best ally, and you need me. So for that. And my question was, you talked about, we are becoming a 5-year collective, collaborative in Bogota. And it's been challenging to keep incentivize some allies. We have some that are so committed that they see the value and they're there for everything. But for some of them, it's like, how do you keep them incentivized to keep going and to keep doing and to keep thinking when you, for instance, you cannot choose 500 pathways. If you tell them, we cannot do this now, but keep coming, how do you do that?
No, great question. And this is also a challenge that we have faced in our network. So an example before I answer your question is that even as a learning network, we always have priorities of focus. And sometimes what happens is, for instance, an organization or a donor changes their focus and decides, no, we're no longer interested in youth economic opportunities so much, but more in agriculture. And so we can't keep going to that donor to say, but youth economic opportunity is very critical. And so I think even as part of a network, it's a balanced approach, knowing when to engage them and when you can keep them informed and the engagement a light touch. And then when you're at that stage ready to come back to engage, reconvening. So using that approach. Then the second thing that's also very critical is having that conversation with them to know, okay, what do you actually want to achieve? Where do you see the connectors between our organizations? And if it's not there, not trying always because it's a big name to connect, because you'll end up spending a lot of time, resources trying to look for that connection. So seeing how you can engage them on a lighter touch and then bringing them to the fore when there's more concrete action. Yeah.
One quick additional recommendation to you is, and we've experienced the same thing with our networks, and they're at this point 10 years old. One of the things that works best, nothing works 100%, but works best, is to invest time in trust building and relationship building throughout the life. So there are certain activities that have no other goals other than bringing people together, having conversation, getting updates on what folks are doing, and then you recalibrate to your shared goals. And when you do that on a regular basis, then people feel engaged, and the evolution of the work changes with input. And because of input, there's ownership, and when there's ownership, there's engagement. You will lose some actors no matter what, because that's also the life. But sometimes a departure is for a good reason, and it's okay. And then you also gain new actors who become part of the network, and the network continues to evolve.
I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to close the session. I know the young person had a question. I'm so sorry. But our colleagues are here, so please do not hesitate after the session to speak with them. So first of all, thank you so much to our panelists, to all of you for the engaging conversation. We really wanted to put this session within really what we're really also here to do, which is really to take the time to learn, exchange, reflect. We're all doers. I think we're always in the day-to-day. And I think this is a really great example of what we wanted to do, was to kind of just step back, think, reflect on the experiences, and really share with you all. Just to bring it very quickly back to GOYN, because this is also all within this concept of learning, is that learning really is also very much at the core of GOYN. So I just wanted to highlight three of the ways in which GOYN is doing this. One is through thought leadership. So really putting out the learning brief, the case studies that really highlight all of your experiences, right? And some of the recommendations and some of the thinking that's gone into this. So we have learning brief, case studies. It's also the community of practice, right? Those spaces where you come together and speak around a very particular topic. And then lastly, it's also with the learning lab. So this is basically a space where there is also a lot of repository of information, a lot of information that you have provided. It's all about your work, your learnings, and what you're building on the ground. So just wanted to highlight that. And again, to say thank you so much for this really wonderful conversation. And thank you to our panelists. I really got to know them. So this was also for me a special treat, and thank you so much.